Houston was booming in a lot of ways in 1904. The streets downtown were paved, most of them. Certainly out where Kinkaid was, they were not. People were allowed to ride their horses to school, and most of the time they came along with a groom, and the groom took the horse back after the student got to school, and then came back and got them in the afternoon.
A public education policy in Houston led to the founding of the Kinkaid School.
When a married woman married, she could no longer teach in the public schools. And Ms. Kinkaid loved teaching, so in her home at the corner of San Jacinto and Elgin, she started with a kindergarten class, and it grew from there.
Mrs. Kinkaid had announced to her class that she was leaving, and a group of parents got together, I think the parents of 7 or 8 of her students, and they came to her and asked if she wouldn't please have her own class and start her own school. And she thought about it, and she said later that she talked about it for 3.5 minutes with her husband and decided to start a little school in her own dining room.
Well, it was mostly a neighborhood school. The children walked because there were houses all around. They found it very pleasant. It was a very happy place.
They had a big wood stove, and she picked out special boys to put wood in the stove every day, and they arrived early and felt very important to do that task. Interestingly enough, they were all in the same classroom, and while, say, the second graders were doing their reading and you were in first grade, she gave you something to do, and you just did it. There was none of this situation here where everything has to be silent while someone else is learning something.
Margaret Kinkaid realized early on that the teacher had a duty to keep growing with the students.
I think part of it is this attitude that learning is a life experience, and that students learn and teachers learn along with them, and teachers keep learning. They keep going to school and they keep learning new things.
She went to the East every summer and studied at Columbia or other outstanding colleges where she could learn.
Eventually, Mrs. Kinkaid saw the need for a board of trustees.
Their duties were to expand the school and make the teaching environment important. So in general, whatever she wanted, they replied, yes, Miss Kinkaid.
And she got the most significant businessmen in the community whose children were in the school to back her. And they did financially, but she never gave them control.
The bottom line was her ruling, and her, even with her board, you know, this was her school.
For students at her school, Margaret Kinkaid was an imposing presence.
We were concomitantly awed and afraid. She would come down the hall and she wore rubber-soled shoes most of the time, so neither the students nor the teachers knew that she was coming.
I'll admit I did have to make a few visits to see Miss Kinkaid on numerous occasions. I don't remember what the instances were, but there's a form of discipline, of course, that teachers would send you down, they have a little visit with a little lady, and so I made a few trips there. But she's a sweet lady.
She had a very small Pekingese that sat outside her office, her dog, always.
It went with her everywhere. You know, she was not one of those people who has a small dog who's always carrying it. Hai Sing was on his little leash and he toddled along right in front of Miss Kinkaid, and we were so thankful because we knew when she was coming, because we could hear Hai Sing's little paws on the, on the linoleum before she got there.
She hated records. She never kept any records. That was the problem I had when I wrote the history of the school. There was nothing written down. The only way that I could write the history was trying to interview people who were still alive. And fortunately, I was able to do some just the year before they died. And that's where the history came from, was just from oral interviews. But if I wanted to go back and get my record, my academic record, there are no report cards or anything that were kept.
She never spoke with a microphone. She could silence the entire student body when it was outside by just clapping her hands like that.
Let's dwell on that for a minute. Not everybody can clap their hands. She had it down to a science. It was like a rifle shot. And I can assure you it had much the same effect on everyone. Absolute silence ensued instantaneously. Go ahead.
No, it's quite true. And she had great magnetism, great stature. As the British would say, no nonsense. And it was her school, and we were all richer for it.
Mrs. Kinkaid often maintained discipline through her reputation.
She had the presence. She was a rather large, buxom woman with steel gray hair, and although I don't remember it specifically, probably a rather steely eye, although she had to have a lot of compassion as well, but she masked it well when underlings were ushered into her presence.
Sometimes she would ask for the teacher to come out of the classroom, and we all had great speculation about what that was, and usually it was absolutely nothing. And once in a while she would ask for a student to come out, and then we waited with bated breath to see when the student came back what the expression on the face was. And usually it was that the father was there to pick them up for a happy birthday lunch or something. It was never anything bad.
Style for young women at her school was also something controlled by Mrs. Kinkaid.
Mrs. Kinkaid had a policy of what she called simple dressing. We were not to, of course, wear any jewelry or anything like that, and we were to wear things that were comfortable so we would be happy on the playground. And frankly, clothes were not a big thing when I was at Kinkaid.
We didn't wear makeup. The girls didn't wear makeup to school. And if she found you, and I won't mention who it was for consideration's sake, but I remember in study hall one time there was a girl and she had makeup on, and Mrs. Kinkaid took her out into the bathroom, and all we had was cold water and soap and those nasty, rough, brown hand towels. And she scrubbed her face, sent her home with a note to Daddy. So that was the way things were handled.
Throughout it all, Margaret Kinkaid earned respect from her students. Damon Wells recalls one time when he and David Underwood sold hamsters at field day.
We had no place to put the hamsters that we found when we came to field day, so we shared a table occupied by the potato salad sellers. So there we have the animals and the salad. I'm sure the health department today would be horrified, but that seemed to have created no problem. And if it did, she was kind enough not to say anything about it, much less take away our booth. And I later found out that she had entered into our records. David and Damon are very loyal students. I cherish that coming from her.
She was considerate and concerned, and you felt that you were important to her. She would sometimes ask me to come, and she would ask me my opinion about something that she was concerned about with the students. And I would tell her how I felt about it. And I felt very comfortable telling her the truth, not trying to gloss it.
Above all, Mrs. Kinkaid kept an eye on the school.
She watched over everything pretty sternly and pretty carefully.
Her school was her life. And every single moment she spent thinking about her school, being with the students.
After almost 50 years at the helm, Margaret Kinkaid retired.
She decided that she'd done all she could, she said, for the school, and it was time to pass the reins to someone else. And so she did a search herself for her successor. And the story was that when John Cooper walked up the steps to the school, she was looking out of her office window and saw him and said, "That's the one." He was a Yale-educated man, very enthusiastic, father of 7, and she saw in him the enthusiasm, I think, the drive that she had when she started.
John was from the East, was more of a professional type manager, school person than Miss Kinkaid was. Probably needed someone like John because school got pretty large. And of course, John was around for a long, long time.
We were saddened that she had retired, but he had so much energy that we just immediately got on the bandwagon of John Cooper.
Margaret Kinkaid did not enjoy her retirement for long. She died in a single-car accident in December 1951.
I remember when she passed away, when she died, the school was bereft. It was as if a building had fallen down. She died on a vacation, as I recall. And school started up at the regular time. And Mr. Cooper came and said to all of us that Mrs. Kinkaid would have wanted us to continue in her memory, and we would miss her, yes, but we would go right on.
There were still some people around who knew Mrs. Kinkaid when I first arrived, and John Cooper certainly knew her very well and told me many things about her. And it was all just everything one would hope for. She had a dream and a vision for teaching and learning, and she was immensely proud of founding and operating a great school. And she was good at it.
I think the way the school has gone forward is to try to keep the values that Mrs. Kinkaid and Mr. Cooper after her had tried to instill in all of the students. And I think with a school as big as the one that we've got now, I think that's a difficult thing to do, and I admire the fact that they are trying to do that, and that the students that are here at Kinkaid now still feel that sense of family and continuity with all of us who are old-timers and graduated in the dark ages.
She was quite a person. She really did not like house cleaning or cooking or anything. She loved to teach, and she was a fantastic teacher. I've never really been able to find out exactly what she taught. I think probably in that time, being an elementary teacher, she probably taught everything. Some of the wealthy men tried to convince her to move to a new location, and she really was afraid that if she gave in on this, then they would want to tell her how to run the school. And that's one thing I've learned from Miss Kinkaid. You never told Miss Kinkaid what to do. People say, well, what did she give the school? Well, she gave her life to the school. But there were 2 big scholarships were given in her name, which they still give today. And it's probably the highest honor you can win today.